As our hearts are in Israel, and most especially in these past over 9 months, this morning we're going to hear reflections from two of our own family members, two of our own congregational members who just returned in the last number of weeks from very special but different trips to Israel. And we're very honored that Rob Fishman and Rich Loeb will share their reflections and remarks from their trips. And first, we'll call on Rob Fishman.
Thank you, Rabbi Hal, and Shabbat Shalom, everybody. So, how was your Israel trip? This is the first question I understandably receive in almost every conversation after returning. And every time, all of the adjectives come rushing to mind. Intense, meaningful, privileged, important, critical, supportive, scary, emotional, hopeful, disheartening, complex, and powerful. I am grateful for the opportunity to share with you a more complete answer this Shabbat. The truth is, my Israel trip was all of the above and more. This past July, we had our Israel Institute, and it was the culmination of the Wexner Heritage Program, which is a 2-year intensive program committed to developing Jewish leaders by providing deeper knowledge of Torah, Jewish history, and Israel. A big thank you to the Wexner Foundation and Jewish Federation of Cleveland for providing our cohort such an incredible opportunity. I was lucky to be part of such a special group of 20 people across the Cleveland Jewish community who I can now call lifelong friends, some of whom are here today. Without going through every detail of my trip, and I'm more than happy to share with you all the details during Kiddush, I want to summarize the trip around 2 themes: trauma and resilience. The trauma in Israel is real and ongoing. While at times it feels as though much of the diaspora has moved on from October 7th, it is different in Israel. The hostages remain a constant focus for most of the country, and the ongoing war touches all Israelis. Every story shared with us involves some personal connection to someone in the October 7th massacre or a fallen or wounded soldier. We spent time in Tel Aviv's Hostage Square, filled with constantly updated art exhibits on display to ensure the hostages are not forgotten. One exhibit is a tree with hundreds of letters hanging from its branches, written by young students around the world. My friends, who were able to actually find my eldest son, Adam, who's unfortunately not here, his letter that he wrote to the hostages last year, and my niece, Lila, actually found her own letter hanging on her own Gross Schechter trip to Israel in May. These are tangible examples of the critical way our Jewish Cleveland students have already made a meaningful impact on Israel. We sat down to hear the heartbreaking personal story of Abby On, whose 5 family members were reported missing on October 8th. She explained that 10 days later, she learned that 2 of these family members had been murdered: her 80-year-old Aunt Carmela and her 13-year-old granddaughter, Noya. Abby walked us through the emotional journey of learning the fate of her 3 other relatives. During the November ceasefire, 16-year-old Sachar and his 12-year-old brother, Erez, were released, but their father, 53-year-old Ofer, remains held in Gaza along with all the other hostages. We also had the privilege of meeting a handful of residents of Cleveland's Federation's new partner kibbutz, Kitzufim, located just 1.5 miles from Gaza. On October 7th, dozens of Hamas terrorists infiltrated the kibbutz and murdered 18 of their residents, including 6 Thai national workers. We gathered outside the home of 86-year-old Shlomo Matsur, where we learned of his kidnapping. Shlomo remains the oldest person known to be held hostage by Hamas still today. Fortunately, his wife miraculously escaped being captured the same day. We witnessed the heavy destruction caused by the buildings while we could still see Gaza on the other side of the kibbutz fence. So despite hearing endless horrific stories and witnessing damage and destruction, the most unbelievable and unexpected part of the trip for me was the resilience of the Israeli people, including the October 7th survivors. These firsthand accounts of survival, determination to live, and protect their family, including kids as young as my own, seemed like modern-day miracles. Back in Kitzufim, we heard from two men who helped defend the kibbutz to prevent many more deaths. We met Chagi, a grandfather who was proudly wearing his Cavs hat given to him by a prior Cleveland delegation, and who shared how he courageously and bravely defended his house with his two grandchildren inside. Philip was another kibbutz resident who fought off the attack of 3 Hamas terrorists, saving himself and 2 of his children. It was touching to learn that Philip's son is one of the 37 Israeli youth that Federation and other donors helped send to Camp Wise this summer. Perhaps the most profound memory that stuck with me was our first day we visited the site of the Nova Music Festival, which is an evolving memorial to the 364 that were murdered there. This global music festival was sadly officially billed as 3 days of peace and music. We heard from Hila, a survivor of the festival who was bartending that morning. Hila shared a detailed account of her over 8-hour escape, during which small and seemingly insignificant decisions ended up saving her life. Pure miracles. After about 30 minutes sharing her experience, Hila somehow had the strength to tell us that despite all that Hamas took away from her on October 7th, including the murder of many of her friends, she felt that they actually gave her more, with an even bigger circle of 600 new friends with shared experiences who she considers as close to her family. If Hila has the strength to somehow take something positive out of October 7th, we should all try to follow in her footsteps and be as resilient as we can during these difficult times. So what can we do from Cleveland to help? We need to continue to support Israel in every possible way. If it's not us, then who? Plan your next trip to Israel today. Bear witness. Show your support for the Israeli people, family members, and friends, and importantly, continue to stand up to anti-Semitism. We were also privileged on our trip to hear from Dr. Tal Becker, who has served as a legal advisor to the Israeli Ministry of Foreign Affairs and a veteran member who has sat in the room on many prior Israeli-Palestinian peace negotiations. Dr. Becker recently defended Israel at The Hague, the International Court of Justice. He shared so many powerful and thoughtful ideas with us, but one that stuck with me is the night before his opening argument, he nervously called his wife. She reminded him that he is only a vessel for all of the Jewish people. In this week's Parsha, Matot and Masai, we learn about how food utensils or vessels captured during wars can be made kosher through immersion. Dr. Becker ended up writing the word for vessel, kli, on the top of each of his pages of his opening remarks to remind him of the important role that he served. May we all be vessels for the people of Israel. May we only know peace in Israel, a safe and immediate return of the hostages, and may God give strength to the Israeli people and Jews around the world to maintain their resilience and perseverance. Am Yisrael Chai and Shabbat Shalom.
Wow, good Shabbos. That's a tough act to follow. first want to express my appreciation to Rabbi Hal for allowing me to share mine and Helene's experience on our recent trip to Israel. My objective is not providing a play-by-play of our trip, but to share our experiences and insights we gained from being there. Our journey really began after October 7th. Like many of you, we at first felt sad and abandoned, but for me, those feelings of sadness then turned into intense anger. I remember when Erica Luria came to speak to us, and she said, after October 7th, we don't need to be polite anymore. I took her message to heart, and it was imperative that as Jews, regardless of our religious or political beliefs, we show up, and we demonstrate to the world that we stand united. We went to the rally in Washington with our cousins, Barry and Paul. Helene and I attended various other community rallies in support of the hostages and Israel. Helene noted that I was more engaged than I ever was, and she challenged me, as only a wife can, that if you really want to show up, we need to go to Israel. As usual, she was right, and we decided to go on the Friends of the Israel Defense Forces trip because the itinerary was extremely focused on meeting the people and soldiers of the IDF. My purpose in going to Israel was to engage with the people of Israel in the most authentic way possible and express my support. We left for Israel a few days prior to the start of our FIDF journey to visit with family. But before that, we decided to go to Kiryat Arba. Our driver who took us was armed. It was an interesting ride, traversing through the various checkpoints and getting looks from soldiers who were wondering, what were we doing there? Frankly, at certain points, I was wondering that myself. While it is fair to argue the merits of Israel maintaining control over these lands, there is one aspect where there could be no argument. The people who reside there are committed to Israel and the Jewish people. We went to the cave of Machpelah, where our forefathers and foremothers are buried. And to say it was a special experience would be to underestimate the spirituality we felt there. From there, we traveled to Zikron Yaakov to stay with Helene's family, which was incredibly special. The entire family came out to visit us. Politics was certainly a hot topic, and there was more views expressed than people. But what struck me was, regardless of their political orientation, their love of country was unwavering. I should mention that one of Helene's cousins is a celebrated Navy SEAL, but yet so humble. We left Zikron Yaakov for Tel Aviv and met my cousin Ephraim, a former Air Force pilot. He picked us up and said, "I'm taking you both to a special restaurant." This place was a hole in the wall. But the truth is, it was one of the best meals we ever had. That's Israel for you. On our first day, we visited various hospitals where wounded soldiers were recovering. We met with one who was injured defending Kibbutz Be'eri. He was an Orthodox soldier who broke Shabbat, moving as fast as he could to defend a secular, left-leaning kibbutz. Why do I mention this? Because to him, it did not matter. He would give his life protecting his brothers and sisters, regardless of religiosity or political perspective. On the second day was the hardest for us, as we went and volunteered and toured Kibbutz Be'eri. While it was certainly sanitized, you could still see the devastation and feel the horror that must have taken place on that fateful day. One of the speakers was a man whose home was destroyed. He, along with his family, stayed in a safe room for hours while terrorists were outside his door. The Ring camera, which, for whatever reason, was not damaged, caught Hamas terrorists stomping on an Israeli flag 5 feet from their safe room. These safe rooms are not what you think. They are small, hard to breathe in, and the door has no lock. And for hours, they had to hold the handle. The one observation I made is that whether you are in the Gaza envelope, the north, or the eastern edge of Israel, your enemies are not thousands of miles away, but only a few short miles away. We then went to the site of the Nova Festival. While the site was again sanitized, the destruction was evident, and you could feel the sense of horror these young people must have felt, who came out to celebrate life, but instead witnessed death in the most horrific manner. The day ended on a much-needed, uplifting note. We went to Ashkelon to have dinner with soldiers taking a break from the war. All of us were so amazed how they just smiled and were constantly thanking us for being there. By the way, that was true of wherever you went in Israel. I thought to myself, are you kidding? We're here to thank you. Helene and I were seated across from a commander. This kid was 21 years old. All he could speak of was getting back to his unit and what a privilege it was for him to serve in the IDF. This message was being articulated by all of them. We spoke with so many soldiers at numerous army bases. Their love of country, commitment to the Jewish people was nothing short of awe-inspiring. We then visited Rambam Hospital in Haifa. It was the largest underground hospital in Israel. There are underground operating rooms and beds because they believe this is necessary as everyone is expecting war in the north. We then visited Raphael Defense Systems, which is just further north of Haifa. It was an amazing and proud moment to witness the innovation taking place. I was again just so inspired by the commitment of those working there for the defense of Israel. On our last day, we went to Hostage Square and we heard of Viva Siegel, who was held hostage for 7.5 weeks. Her husband Keith is still being held hostage. You cannot imagine what it is like to listen to the hell they have been through. To me, she demonstrated how an ordinary, everyday person become extraordinary. I had the privilege of having a brief one-on-one with her when I noticed her in the hallway after her talk. I told her that she was one of the bravest people I've ever met. She gave me a hug and thanked me. My journey began on a sad, unhappy note after October 7th. People have asked me, wasn't I afraid of being there? My answer was and still is. I felt safer there than I do here. The scariest part of being in Israel was dodging these crazy scooters and drivers. I want to end this message of hope with a message of hope. I am still concerned for our country and Europe. Israel is facing an existential threat. But after being in Israel and seeing their resolve, I believe with our involvement, both financial and spiritual, and God's help, Israel will prevail. However, now more than ever, it is imperative that we give to organizations like the FIDF, JNF, Mogen David Adom, and other organizations that support Israel. I do not know what will be in the world, but I know Israel will always be there for us if we do our part to show up and be there for them. Thank you.
Yashikok, and thank you to Rich and to Rob. Our community is so blessed to have so many of our members so committed to traveling to Israel, to being to Israel with their hearts in Israel. And I hope that you will take advantage and do that as well. This Parshat Matot Maseh, is actually the first creation of a diaspora community. As the 12 tribes are ready to enter the land of Israel, 2 tribes, Reuven and Gad, say, we're going to stay on this side of the Jordan River. We're not going to go into Israel. They work a compromise with Moshe. The compromise is our hearts, our actions. We're still going to cross into Israel. As often as we can, we're going to be there. We're going to visit. We're going to do our part, even if we're not in Israel. And that's what Rob and Rich and so many of us have done. We've brought our hearts, our treasures, and all that we can do into Israel. And we've also brought Israel here. As Rob said, all those students, all those teenagers and middle schoolers who were here at Camp Wise for the last number of weeks, we have actually visited them. They actually came to our synagogue before they started to get a sense of what Jewish life is in America. We welcomed them here with a lot of chocolate and a lot of fun. And we also, when we visited our own children from B'nai Yeshurun at Camp Wise, we brought our Israeli now children donuts because they're a part of our community. What Rich and Rob expressed is what we all express. We are all one family, and we're committed to always having Israel in our heart. Am Yisrael Chai, and Shabbat Shalom.